All right, we'll go ahead and get started. If you're in the audience, you can silence your cell phones if you don't mind, and I'll have to do the same, make sure I'm good. And we'll go ahead and call the roll, and we've just got an hour, so we'll go ahead and get started. And we're just a few minutes behind with KET, I think, so having a bit of a technical difficulties that we'll get fixed, but I think.
Here he comes. You ready to call the roll?
Yep, let's call the roll.
Representative Brown, Representative Imes, Representative DJ Johnson, Representative Palumbo, Representative Petrie, Representative Reed, Representative Bratcher, and Chairman Freeland.
Here. Thank you. All right. We'll wait to approve the minutes for the first and second meetings since I would have to first and second. I believe Mr. John Hicks is here, so we thank him. He is the budget director with the governor's office in East Kentucky state aid funding for emergencies, the EK Safe, and also for West Kentucky. And I appreciate you being here. If you just introduce yourselves, and you may begin.
Thank you, Chairman Freeland. Thank you for having us here. My name's John Hicks, Secretary of the Governor's Cabinet and State Budget Director, and I'll ask the other two to introduce themselves.
I'm Jeremy Slinker, the State Director for Kentucky Emergency Management.
Hi, Stephanie Robey. I'm Assistant Director at Kentucky Emergency Management, responsible for the administrative side of the house.
And thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us, Mr. Chairman. I want to give you all an update today, basically on both SAFE funds and kind of an explanation of the process that we go through with applications, review, and approvals, and the information on awards that have been made to date, how much, what for, and to whom, as well as identify. I've got an issue that I want to identify a little bit later in the presentation, and happy to take questions. So let me just start, kind of in sequential order. In the Western Kentucky state aid funding, in the 22 regular session, the General Assembly appropriated $200 million. And in the recent special session, extended the time period for that fund through June 30th, 2026. And here's how the $200 million breaks down. Emergency management, which we're here to basically talk about today, gets the biggest bulk of the money, but also a $30 million to the Department of Education, $25 million to a new program over in economic development called the Risk Assistance Fund. And then there was a special $9 million dedicated to the University of Kentucky. They lost a whole lot of that facility in Princeton, Kentucky, then a small amount to Murray State. On the East Kentucky side, we had a special session last summer, appropriated another $200 million from the general fund, and we still had about $12.7 million left from the federal ARPA funds that could be used for water and sewer infrastructure, and so that was added as well. In this case, the fund expires at the end of the current biennium. And how did that $200 million get split up? Emergency management has $75 million. But then in a separate provision, they had another $40 million. And the language in that second provision said that if you don't spend all the 75 or award all the 75 by January 7th, essentially when the General Assembly convened for this session, that authorization expired. And so we're here to also inform you of that and then advocate that we really need that $40 million and it would require an action of the General Assembly. And we'll continue to communicate that to other members to make sure everybody's clear on why that is. In the Department of Education, and let me just add, my office reports every month to the Appropriations and Revenue Committee. The Department of Education reports every month to the department to the interim to Appropriations and Revenue on the uses of the funds. So just for y'all's information, we monthly update the awards that are made. Then $45 million to the Transportation Cabinet for the non-federal share of state road and bridge repairs for the Eastern Kentucky disaster. So first, what's in the law? These are areas within those two designated federal disasters, the tornadoes and the storms in the west and the flooding in the east. Local governments are eligible recipients. Nonprofit or public utility service providers are eligible recipients, state agencies, and school districts. So that's the who that can. Now, for what? One of the things that's important that was in both versions of the bills, the West Kentucky and East Kentucky, was that applicants must do their due diligence and make sure they apply for any eligible FEMA assistance and any insurance claims. The idea with the SAFE Fund kind of being a backstop to some of those things. one of the important elements that, in working with the General Assembly was for strained fiscal liquidity. And that kind of means for the city of Mayfield, who had to endure a lot of unexpected expenses, in their municipal government, unbudgeted uses, right? To initially recover. They had to write checks, they weren't planning to write checks for. And so the other parts of the government that needs to run and operate that is funded and budgeted by the city, could go lacking. And so in order to fill that gap so that they can keep their regular, processes and operations going, we have an ability for them to apply and us to award funding for that strained fiscal liquidity. It's not for the disaster relief. It's for the things that would have go wanting because they had to urgently move some of their resources. Also, renovation, replacement of public buildings that were damaged, reimbursements for costs during response and recovery, planning efforts. You'll see in several cases some of these localities are working on a community or floodplain planner to really, think of Mayfield and Dawson Springs particularly, where they really have to think about how to rebuild. And then other uses relating to the damage from the disasters. And in both bills, the funding is for the damage related to the tornadoes and storms or flooding, not for anything else. So it's narrowly drawn on purpose. So in the West Kentucky Fund, same uses as in the, what I'm saying here is in the special session this summer, where we were dealing with the Eastern Kentucky Safe Fund, there was an additional use provided for the Western Kentucky Safe Funds. And that was in recognition of some public school districts particularly and local governments whose property valuations are going to decline because of the destruction, basically, of homes and businesses. And so we've been dealing with the local superintendents particularly about this issue, very concerned because of the way that the SEEK fund formula will work. And so as a response to that, that became a new additional use with a step down over these next 3 years, as you'll see. The point that I want to make here is those jurisdictions cannot seek the funds until the year we're in is over, right? Because you got to prove what did you get this year versus what did you get the prior year. So I wanted to make you aware that's a forthcoming set of expectations on the West Kentucky side.
And I do have one question you mentioned the SAFE funding. It was used kind of as a backstop when FEMA was used, if FEMA was not there, so that they could make good on checks. If they receive later money from FEMA or other federal agencies, does the state, do they return that money back to the state?
Thank you for reminding me. I skipped over that inadvertently. Yeah, the way the bill reads is if there are other sources that come to that jurisdiction, that city, that county, that utility, then they have a payback provision to the SAFE fund within the time period that the SAFE fund still exists, or to the general fund if it were to be later in time. So that's definitely a highlighted provision, and one that when we monitor and will monitor because the people beside me really pay close attention. They know what comes back from FEMA and other, for example, a delayed insurance claim as well. Yeah, thank you for the reminder.
And that money could be used for other needs regarding
absolutely. Yeah, in fact,
or flooding.
It's supposed to come back into the SAFE fund itself while that SAFE fund is active. That's why I put the termination dates there. Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to turn it over to Director Slinker to talk about some of the processes that we've instituted.
Hey, thanks for having me and opportunity to answer any questions or anything that we can help clear up. So both bills identified the Department of Military Affairs Division of Emergency Management to administer the funds. And so there we're very used to administering the Federal Emergency Management Agency funds and things, but this was new for us. And so we had to start from zero and kind of build up the system. And there, one of the first things we did was provide technical assistance, and we continue to do that almost daily. I'm comfortable with saying daily. So if there's questions, because it's brand new, it's a brand new bill, brand new fund, brand new way we administer it. And whether it's myself, Assistant Director Robey, or others in the building, we're always answering calls or available if we can help walk through this new process. But so what will happen is we created a application and a set of guidelines that were provided to the local applicants, and they'll submit their applications to a multi-agency team for review. On that team are several subject matter experts, as described by Secretary Hicks. There's a wide variety of different eligible uses for it. So we've tried to find the subject matter experts that can talk about whether it's water or sewer or road or whatever it may be that we're talking about as well. So it's comprised of multiple different experts coming from emergency management, finance administration, energy, environment, cabinet, local Department of Local Government, and general counsels as well. And of course, the state budget office is present. So when we get those applications, we'll call a meeting, and there's no set time for the meetings. There's no set, we're only going to meet when we get application in. Our goal is to act on them as fast as we can. So we'll call a meeting, impromptu meeting, very quickly, but that multi-agency team will get in review, and the first thing we're going to look for to determine if the application is eligible, and that is, Secretary Hicks said, the who and the what. First, who's asking, are they eligible, and then what are they asking for, is it eligible? And then moving on, and occasionally, and this is common in the emergency management reimbursement processes, occasionally the application won't tell the whole story, or we would like to see some additional information provided to help us understand what to ask for. So we'll defer those and then communicate back to the applicant that what we would like clarified, and ask that they provide us that documentation or resubmit if they needed to or whatever. But once the team gets there where all or part of the application can be approved, then we'll approve the application, then it'll immediately go into processing. And that very first award, as I'll call it, that requires a contract with the state and the applicant. So that first award, we start the contract process. And I wanted to point that out because that starts with emergency management, back to the local applicant, then back to emergency management, and then we'll send upstairs to the administration of Department of Military Affairs, and then over to the finance cabinet, and then we can execute the contract and submit the award into the account for the local applicant. Now, beyond that, because there's no limit on the number of applications you can submit, beyond that, we put the language in there where we don't have to do that contract price every time, because our goal is to expedite these as much as legally possible. And so beyond that first award, after that, it just goes from emergency management processing to the applicant, and we move them right on from there.
Yeah, I've not heard any negative stories about the state's fund. I've heard several about FEMA with the being denial. Of course, I'm from Marshall County where it was impacted, and heard some stories. Is the wait time, is that improved any? Is Eastern Kentucky experiencing sort of the same issues we have in West Kentucky with FEMA?
Well, I can say we met as late as this morning, about how with FEMA and their cooperation with us about what do we need to do to move faster and unlock some of these things and get the funds out. So we're constantly advocating. They're at the table trying to figure out the big process and the big system of how we can improve it here at the local level and get money on the street as fast as possible.
Because I appreciate how Kentucky has streamlined that process for the counties and for individuals, and I wish they would take a page from our book.
Yeah. Let me add one other thing. When Director Slinker was talking about the technical assistance, we've only had a very small number of denials of applications, and I think that goes to the amount of assistance that emergency managers are providing to the applicants. Right? We don't want to deny. I mean, we want to coach them to meet the requirements, but so that there isn't a lot of back and forth, so we can move things forward.
Thanks, Secretary. And that's kind of where I'll kind of wrap up. we're always available for consultation, whether it's with somebody from the General Assembly, any of those local governments that call. I regularly talk to members of them. Ms. Robey talks to members of them as well, of those local governments. So we're always available for that consultation if they have a question, and we'll continue to do that. And then if we get follow-up documentation on any stuff, then we immediately call the meeting and we immediately put the new stuff in front of it, and we work to get to that yes and get some funds out on the street so they can keep doing their recovery as well.
Just wanted to provide a little bit of information of the awards so far. So, I think this is a little out of order, but I'll get back to it. So in East Kentucky Safe Fund, of the $75 million that I was referring to that went to emergency management because the other 40 has now expired, we've done about $40 million of awards there. And you can see in those two big blue boxes, 90% of it are either strained fiscal liquidity to cities and counties and utilities or their share of FEMA eligible projects. And what I mean by that is typically FEMA is a 75% federal, 25% non-federal. And in Kentucky, for a longstanding policy has been that the Commonwealth pays 12% and the local entity pays 13%. So this is the 13% primarily of local applicants, and the way that we come at it, they have to, and Stephanie Robey keeps an eye on that. We actually look into the FEMA portal to determine the values that the projects have been submitted, and so the applicant is estimating what that value is, and we go to the amount that the portal at least expresses. So if it's less than what they estimated, they'll come back with another application to get to fill it back up. So it's not so that's good documentation from our standpoint. Yet we have them come back so that we continuously try to meet what is the 13% of the values in the portal. A couple of things, you mentioned there's something on here called high ground sites. One of the things that was in the East Kentucky Safe Fund was, an expectation of some of the recovery, that we're going to have with relocation of residences. And so governors had a number of announcements where we had donated property on previously mined land, flat. And we have initiated two things, right? We have the Finance Administration Cabinet does some surveys, title work, geotechnical analysis on the sites. And then in one of the sites in Knott County, the one that's now referred to as Olive Branch, where we had a donated site, we have initiated some right-of-way funding for the Transportation Cabinet because they're going to be constructing a road to that site. And so I've got here more for your reference, a listing of the values and the applicants of the $39.7 million. In the East Kentucky, you'll see 8 cities and 7 counties, 2 school districts, and 6 utilities. And we put this in here, Mr. Chairman, kind of for your reference. As we move through to the West Kentucky side, of the $145 million, $61.6 million has been approved and awarded. And you'll see the same 2 large boxes down at the bottom, strained fiscal liquidity and the local share of FEMA, their non-federal share match. In this case, we have the universities because of that $9 million that went to the University of Kentucky in the legislation. But we also had, one of the first things that was done in the early part of the West Kentucky recovery was travel trailers. And so the legislation actually put in a specific amount of money so that emergency management could acquire, set up, and locate travel trailers there in Western Kentucky. We did the same thing on Eastern Kentucky, but we didn't have a specified amount in there. So, but we've done a whole lot of that in Western and Eastern Kentucky as well. Again, a listing of the who and the how much in West Kentucky: 10 counties, 5 cities, 7 utilities, and 1 school district so far have been among the awards to date. That leaves a balance, and what I didn't mention to you, Mr. Chairman, is that the balance in the West Kentucky Fund is now about $83 million of the 145, and the balance in the East Kentucky Fund is $36 million, but we would advocate for the $40 million to be retained. Our idea there, Mr. Chairman, is we're not moving outside that $200 million originally appropriated. We just want to reinstate that 40. So that would bring that balance up to about 75 million. And we know, having the two beside me have really lived through it, and I and others who are part of the review team have understood there's more coming. We haven't even started to scratch the surface on water and wastewater damage in the East Kentucky floods. Some of the infrastructure we want to do to these high ground sites, we're not there yet in terms of being ready to award funds for water, sewer access, as well as transportation road access. There's a whole lot of damage in the East Kentucky around roads and bridges, particularly counties. The Transportation Cabinet in East Kentucky has taken a really different role than we've seen in past flooding disasters, whereas they have taken on the responsibility of procuring the repairs to county roads and county bridges, simply because we had so much, and they've got a capacity. They're really good at that job, and so they've taken that on. So some of the funding that would benefit and is benefiting the counties in eastern Kentucky, we're flowing through the Transportation Cabinet. They're kind of acting as the agent for that. And so that they've done a heck of a job. And Secretary Gray, I think, was in another committee this morning kind of reporting on some of the efforts that they have made there. So they also were key in setting up and locating the travel trailers in both West and East Kentucky. And so they've really done a yeoman's job in both of these situations in terms of contributing efforts beyond that which you would see in disasters in the past. Some of the Western Kentucky even recovery activities, will continue. One of the things that you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, that is true, is the timing of when FEMA says, here's the amount of money we'll give back to you. We will already have fixed a road. We will already have repaired a building. We will already have expended those funds, and we have an estimate of what we think we get. And so it will move out in time in terms of, so an applicant may have asked for 100 and the cost was 120, but they only got 100 back. So we'll have to contend with some of these issues for a while. The other things that I want to mention is we're going to see a number of local roads and bridges which may not become eligible for FEMA reimbursement, but still need to be repaired. And so the SAFE Fund will provide an avenue to assist the fiscal courts and the municipalities in helping to finance the cost of those repairs that FEMA will not reimburse for. And so the theme there is the full impact is not fully realized, but we're working through it. And I will say that the technical assistance that emergency management provides to local leaders, is going a long way in, and I say preparing for what's still to come. So with that, Mr. Chairman, we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay. You mentioned the housing, and I know that the trailers were very beneficial. I got to brag on our state parks, Lake Barkley, Ken Lake, Kentucky Dam, and West Kentucky. They were not prepared and not accustomed. They're accustomed to having guests come and pay to stay there, and they did a great job of kind of switching gears and having temporary housing there. Are people still without homes, or how is that working? Do we still have some housing for anyone?
Yes. So currently we still have 208, we call them households or families in travel trailers at this time. I think 2 families, and that's in Eastern Kentucky, so I can I think by memory, get both of them. And also in Eastern Kentucky, I think 2 families in hotels, and still 5 families in State Park at Jenny Wiley. So 215 families or so still in our sheltering program, not to mention that FEMA is running their direct housing program. So they have some families that we don't have any visibility on, and then some of ours are overlapping, and they're staying in our sheltering until their FEMA direct housing comes open. But the permanent housing, there's still, yes, that's still a lot of folks that don't have permanent housing. And we still, from the tornadoes in West Kentucky, we have 13 families still in travel trailers. So I think 125 was where we maxed out at. And so, we're down to 13. Most of those have their option being built. A lot of them, I think 7 of them are on private sites, so their home's being built, so they're going to get to stay right there until their home's completed. And then we're utilizing our disaster case managers to just work with those other families the best we can to find them what's the next step out of a travel trailer. So that's the current status of that.
All right. And do you have any suggestions for East Kentucky as far as developing and encouraging for housing developments in the future?
Well, I would say these high ground sites that we've kind of termed is one area we're working on, and we're working with all the community leaders in that. And so we're identifying the properties I mentioned earlier, working with the landowners. We've got a number of them kind of in the mix, not yet ready to be announced. And then the key after that would be it's a combination of getting infrastructure to it. We're actually getting ready to issue an RFP for what we call a program manager, because guess what we don't do? We do not develop neighborhoods, right? In terms of that. So we need some expertise, some people who know how to do that to help coordinate the effort between philanthropy, because there's a significant level of philanthropy that's going on. Western Kentucky is the best first example of that in terms of home building, not only the donation of land, but home building. And this combination, by bringing infrastructure to some of these sites and having a dedicated amount for the victims, possibility to enter. In some of these locations, the developers will also take advantage of the fact the infrastructure there and be able to construct other residences on that property. So we kind of get a public-private partnership where we've kind of, if you will, got a subsidized housing through both government and philanthropy, and then developed locations or locations that can be developed now, so that there is at least some availability. And this is greenfield for us, right? We've never tried that, but the fact that some of these owners have really stepped up and offered land, and we're still in a couple of situations where we want to acquire land, and so that will be a little different situation. But it's a step in the right direction. It'll take a while to get done, but we're organizing and working closely, and Director Slinker knows more about this than I do. Working closely with all of the groups who are interested, in the housing in both West and East Kentucky. We don't want to reinvent the wheel because there are people out there who do this. And so we're trying to be a coordinator, be a gap filler on financing, so that it's a combination of public-private, to achieve, locations first and then residences second.
Yeah. Well, I know in West Kentucky it was, we've never been through anything like this. Hope we never have to again, but so, yeah, there was a lot of learning that took place, especially for me and for the people in my community. But everybody did step up, and I was proud the state stepped up and did a great job and will continue to do so. I'm glad that there's still some money there. And are there any plans to use that money in West Kentucky anyway? It's $83 million. I know we've still got, when the leaves fall, you start seeing all the flattened trees, and I know that's probably a danger in some aspects for anyone out there, but as far as cleaning that up and...
Well, we're still, kind of, and as I say, we're kind of the catcher's mitt on this fund right now, right? We're waiting for others to throw the ball to us. And so as Director Slinker and Stephanie and her staff continue to advise and work with the Western Kentucky communities, you're right, there's funding there. The recipients have to be, a local government, a public utility, or a school district, or a state agency, and so the funds aren't there for what we refer to as individual assistance, as what FEMA does in the initial stages of a response to a disaster. So we're still there. We know there are things that are coming, but we don't have. I will say I couldn't tell you how much is coming next week, next month. Stephanie, anything you want to add?
I'll interject. As you pointed out, FEMA has been moving slow on the obligation of a lot of projects. And part of that problem rests with you had the massive event in the West, and FEMA brought, at one point in time, they had almost 1,000 employees in this state. And as they are hitting their stride, then we get hit in the East. And so they had to shift their people across, which put the West kind of in a holding pattern for a while. So at this point, there are still a lot of projects that FEMA has not made a determination on. And so if, as the Secretary pointed out, if FEMA says, well, you asked for 100, but we're going to give you 50, then that's a gap that the SAFE Fund is available for. So I don't think that we will have the full extent of those gaps for several months yet. And then we will be communicating with these applicants saying, you know, you are eligible to ask back again if you need those funds.
Okay. So it is important, as you mentioned, that we extend that time that those funds can be utilized.
Yes, I agree. And you did so in a special session for the West. And so I would say it would be a good idea to do it in the East, whether it's done in this session or in the 2024 session, because there's time there too. But I think we'll have the same situation where we don't want, you know, I mean, if, you know, assuming that our funds are still there, right? There's going to be, I expect, and I think we can say this, there's a higher demand for those than in need in the East than there is in the West, given our experience that what we're learning in the West. So, yeah, I would agree.
Well, it was amazing to hear the number of bridges that were washed out in the East, and you know, it's hard to wrap your mind around the devastation.
It is.
that
And
took
in
place.
in the transportation cabinet awards that are in there on the East side, there was like 6.1 million for 81 county bridges. And there's more to come, but, you know, the 81 that are either being, you know, contracted for, unprocessed, or completed. And so we're going to see more.
And I guess too, I'm sure you've done evaluations on all the roads and bridges, but there may be down the road some projects that need to be done that were related to the flooding.
Oh, I imagine so. Yes.
So, well, thank you. Anything else?
No,
Okay.
but appreciate you allowing us to come here
Oh,
today.
thank you so much for being here. I greatly appreciate it. Is that it? All right. Well, we'll go ahead and adjourn unless any member has any objections. All right. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.